Hello everyone, in this video we are going to learn about gills, and after that we will be learning about some points related to respiratory system. As a quick recap, so a gill is a respiratory organ found in many aquatic organisms that extract dissolved oxygen from water and excrete carbon dioxide. The gills of some species such as hermit crabs have adapted to allow respiration on land, provided they are kept moist. Branchia is the zoologist's name for gills. Branchia is the zoologist's name for gills. With the exception of some aquatic insects, the filaments and lamellae contains blood or coelomic fluid from which gases are exchanged through the thin walls. The blood carries oxygen to other parts of the body. Carbon dioxide passes from the blood through the thin gill tissue into the water. Gills consist of thin filaments of tissue, lamellae, branches, or slender tufted process that have a highly folded surface to increase surface area. The delicate nature of the gills is possible because this surrounding water provides support. The blood or other body fluids must be in intimate contact with the respiratory surface for ease of diffusion. A high surface area is crucial to the gas exchange of aquatic organisms as water contains only a small function of the dissolved oxygen that air does. Oxygen has a diffusion rate in air 10,000 times greater than in water. The use of sac-like lungs to remove oxygen from water would not be sufficiently enough to sustain life. Rather than using lungs, gaseous exchange takes place over the surface of highly vascularized gills over which a very one-way current of water is kept flowing by a specialized pumping mechanism. The density of water prevents the gills from collapsing and lying on top of each other, which is what happens when a fish is taken out of water. Usually, water is moved across the gills in one direction by the current, by the motion of the animal through water, by beating a cilia or other appendages, or by means of pumping mechanism. In some fishes and mollusks, the deficiency of gill is enhanced by countercurrent exchange, in which water passes over the gills in the direction opposite to the flow of blood through them. Then next, ctenidium. A ctenidium is a respiratory organ or gill which is found in mollusks. The structure exists in bivalves, cephalopods, and polyplacophorans or chitins, and in aquatic gastropods such as freshwater snail and marine snails. Some aquatic gastropods passes one ctenidium known as monotenidia and monopectinate, and others have a pair of ctenidia known as bipectinate. A ctenidium is shaped like a comb or feather with a united part from which many filaments or plate-like structures protrude and line up in a row. It hangs into the mantle cavity and increases the area available for gas exchange. The word is Latinized but is devised from the Greek word tenidia, which means little comb. Based on topography, ctenidia present in mollusks can be divided into holobranchiate types, like found in Polyplacophora. The ctenidia extend all over the body. The index of ctenidia varies from 14 to 170 pairs, and in some cases, the number may extend to 80 pairs in an Acanthophilura. Then merobranchiate type. When the ctenidia remain restricted to a particular area of the body, it's called the merobranchiate type. This can be further divided into following, representing on the arrangement of leaflets, like plicate type. This type consists of simple flat, transversely folded projecting integumentary laminae. In pneumonia, a tuft of filaments arise from the cloacal walls. Then monopectinate type. This type consists of flattened gill filaments arranged in only single side of the ctenidial axis. Then bipectinate form. This type of ctenidia has flattened gill filaments arranged in two rows. This may be of two types, like equal and unequal. Then feathered type. This type of ctenidium is characteristic of cephalopods. Ctenidia has also modified in some forms as anal gills and serratia. I'm sorry, I don't know what it is. Ctenidia has also modified in some forms as anal gills. Next topic, physiological anatomy of respiratory tract. When we try to have an introduction about this topic, respiration is the process by which oxygen is taken in and carbon dioxide is given out. The first breath takes since only after birth. Fetal lungs are non-functional. So during intrauterine life, the exchange of gases between fetal blood and mother's blood occurs through placenta. After the first breath, the respiratory process continues throughout life. Permanent stoppage of respiration occurs only at death. Here we could see normal respiratory rate at different ages, like newborn 30 to 60 per minute. Early childhood 20 to 40 per minute. After that, late childhood 15 to 25 per minute, and adult 12 to 16 per minute. Then types of respiration. Respiration is classified into two types, like external respiration is there, that involves exchange of respiratory gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide between lungs and blood. Then internal respiration is there, which involves exchange of gases between blood and tissues. Then phases of respiration. Respiration occurs in two phases, like inspiration will be there, like inspiration in which inspiration during which air enters the lungs from atmosphere. Then expiration, during which air leaves the lungs. During normal breathing, inspiration is an active process and expiration is a passive process. We know that. Then functional anatomy of respiratory tract. Respiratory tract is the anatomical structure through which air flows and air moves in and out. This includes nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi and lungs. Then pleura. Each lung is enclosed by a bilayered serous membrane called pleura or pleural sac. Pleura has two layers, namely inner visceral and outer parietal layers. Visceral layer is attached firmly to the surface of the lungs. At hilum, it is continuous with parietal layer, which is attached to the wall of thoracic cavity. Then intrapleural space or pleural cavity. Intrapleural space or pleural cavity is the narrow space in between the two layers of pleura. Then intrapleural fluid. Intrapleural space contains a thin film of serous blood called intrapleural fluid, which is secreted by the visceral layer of the pleura. Here we could see a picture of respiratory tract, like concave region, nasopharynx is there, oral cavity is there, epiglottis, glottis, right lung and left lung will be there, trachea region, along with that diaphragm is also there. So later that we will be learning about the functions of intrapleural fluid. It functions as a lubricant to prevent friction between two layers of pleura. It is involved in creating the negative pressure called intrapleural pressure within intrapleural space. Then pleural cavity in abnormal conditions. In some pathological conditions, the pleural cavity expands with accumulation of air, like pneumothorax, water, or hypothorax, blood, hemothorax, and pyothorax, like pus-filled thoracic cavity. Pleural cavity. Then tracheobronchial tree. Trachea and bronchi are together called tracheobronchial tree. It forms a pair part of air passage. Then components of tracheobronchial tree is there. Trachea bifurcate into two main or primary bronchus called right and left bronchi. Each primary bronchus enters the lungs and divide into secondary bronchi. Secondary bronchi divide into tertiary bronchi. In right lung there are 10 tertiary bronchi and in left lung there are 8 tertiary bronchi. Tertiary bronchi divide several times with reduction in length and diameter into many generations of bronchioles. When the diameter of bronchiole become 1 mm or less, it is called terminal bronchiole. Then terminal bronchiole continue or divide into respiratory bronchioles which have a diameter of 0.5 mm. Upper and lower respiratory tracts. Generally, respiratory tract is divided into two parts. Upper respiratory tract, that includes all the structures from nose up to vocal cords. Vocal cords are the folds of mucous membrane within layers that vibrates to produce the voice. Then lower respiratory tract, which includes trachea, bronchi and lungs. Then respiratory unit. Parenchyma of lungs is formed of respiratory unit that forms the terminal portion of respiratory tract. A respiratory unit is defined as the structural and functional unit of lung. Exchange of gases occurs only in this part of the respiratory tract. Then structure of respiratory unit. Respiratory unit starts from the respiratory bronchioles. Each respiratory bronchiole divides into alveolar ducts. Each alveolar duct enters an enlarged structure called the alveolar sac. Space inside the alveolar sac is called antrum. Alveolar sac consists of clusters of alveoli. Few alveoli are present in the walls of alveolar duct also. Thus, respiratory unit include respiratory bronchioles, alveolar duct, alveolar sacs, antrum, alveoli. Each alveolus is like a pouch with a diameter of about 0.2 to 0.5 mm. It is lined by epithelial cells. Then alveolar cells or pneumocytes. Alveolar epithelium consists of alveolar cells or pneumocytes which are of two types, namely type 1 alveolar cells and type 2 alveolar cells. Like type 1 alveolar cell, the squamous epithelial cells forming about 95% of the total number of cells. These cells form the site of gaseous exchange between the alveolus and blood. Then type 2 alveolar cells. Type 2 alveolar cells are cuboidal in nature and form about 5% of alveolar cells. The cells are also called granular pneumocytes. Type 2 alveolar cells secretes alveolar fluid and surfactant. Here we could see a picture of respiratory unit. Respiratory bronchiole is there, alveolar sac is there, alveolar ducts are associated with that, then antrum region, then alveoli is also there. Then respiratory membrane. Respiratory membrane is the membrane structure through which the exchange of gases occurs. Respiratory membrane separates air in the alveoli from the blood in capillary. It is formed by the alveolar membrane and capillary membrane. A respiratory membrane has a surface area of 70 square meter and thickness of 0.5 micron. The structure of respiratory membrane is explained later, and now we are going to learn about the non-respiratory functions of respiratory tract. Besides primary function of gaseous exchange, the respiratory tract is involved in several non-respiratory functions of the body. Particularly, the lungs function as a defense barrier and metabolic organ, which synthesize some important components or compounds. Non-respiratory functions of the respiratory tract are olfaction. Olfactory receptors present in the mucous membrane of nostril are responsible for olfactory sensation. Then vocalization, among with other structures. Larynx forms the speech apparatus. However, larynx alone plays major role in the process of vocalization. Therefore, it is called sound box. Then prevention of dust particles. Dust particles which enter the nostrils from air are prevented from reaching the lungs by filtration action of the hairs in nasal mucous membrane. Small particles which escape the hairs are held by the mucus secreted by nasal mucous membrane. Those dust particles which escape nasal hairs and nasal mucous membranes are removed by the phagocytic action of macrophages in the alveoli. Particles which escape the protective mechanism in nose and alveoli are thrown out by cough reflex and sneezing reflex. Then defense mechanism. Lungs play important role in the immunological defense mechanism system of the body. Defense functions of the lungs are performed by their own defenses and by the presence of various types of cells in mucous membrane lining the alveoli of the lungs. These cells are leukocytes, macrophages, mast cells, natural killer cells, and dendritic cells. So that's all about this topic. Thank you for listening.